There's a quick check off the highway not far from where I live. It's the only place open 24/7 in my rural, middle-of-nowhere town, about a 25-minute drive if I'm speeding, which I usually am. So for anyone used to city life, that's basically right next door. My sleep schedule is beyond atrocious, so I've been there more times than I can count. I like to think I'm pretty nondescript, the kind of person who blends into the background, but I wouldn't be surprised if the late-night employees recognize me by now. This happened just last week, so the details are still painfully fresh. It was past midnight, and I was deep into coding on my laptop, locked into that rare flow state that hits between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. The problem with late-night grinding is how quickly you go from comfortable to starving, which is exactly why around 2 a.m. I shut everything down and decided to grab food. The highway leading to the quick check is more of a local road than a real interstate, so it's usually dead at that hour. The drive there was uneventful. I pulled in, ordered a sandwich, and started pacing the aisles while I waited. Between the caffeine buzzing through me and the ADHD I've lived with my whole life, sitting still just isn't an option. That's when I noticed something strange. At the back of the store, facing one of the refrigerators, a person was sitting cross-legged on the floor. It was so odd that I initially looked away, then snapped my head back to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't. There was actually a man sitting on the ground, staring into the fridge. All I could see at first was a brown coat and jeans. I wanted to see his face, so I moved down a few aisles, planning to peek quickly and then disappear before he noticed me. I tried to look casual, pretending to browse snacks, but the moment I turned the corner, he whipped his head around and locked eyes with me. The movement was so abrupt that I froze. One look at him confirmed something was very wrong. His eyes were unnaturally wide, his lip visibly quivering like he was cold, even though it was warm inside and he was wearing a jacket. His posture was twisted and strained, like sitting there took effort. But the worst part was his expression. He wasn't smiling or scowling. He just stared at me with this empty, dead look that made it feel like I was being watched by something already gone. After what felt like way too long, I finally looked away and hurried down another aisle, desperate to leave. My food wasn't ready yet, so I waited at the counter, anxiety building. I angled myself so I could still see the corner where he'd been sitting, half expecting him to come around the aisle. He never did. When my food was finally ready, I left immediately. I thought that was the end of it. But as I pulled back onto the highway, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. I looked toward the store and saw someone sprinting full speed across the parking lot. I was already merging onto the road, but when I caught sight of the brown coat, my stomach dropped. It was him. As I passed the quick check, I saw him jump into a truck. I didn't want to imagine what someone like that could be rushing to do at 2 a.m. I just wanted to get home. A few minutes later, the fluorescent lights faded behind me, and I was back in total darkness. I'm used to being the only car on the road at that hour, which is why the headlights in my rearview mirror surprised me. What scared me more was how fast they were closing in, even though I wasn't driving slow. I assumed it was a cop and slowed down slightly, bracing for flashing lights. But when the vehicle got close enough, I realized it wasn't police. It was him, the same truck. I've never been more certain of anything. I hit the gas. He started flashing his lights and honking. I didn't know whether to outrun him or pull over and hope he kept going. I was in a sedan, he was in a pickup, but I figured speed was my best chance. As I accelerated past 100 miles per hour, terror set in, the kind where you feel death getting closer with every second. I tried to let him pass, swerving into the right lane, but he stayed behind me. When I started slowing to pull over, his truck rammed into my car. Everything blurred. I grabbed the wheel, realizing this wasn't intimidation. He was trying to kill me. I knew another hit at that speed could spin me out. When I saw him go for it again, instinct took over. I swerved left and slammed on the brakes. His truck shot past me, fishtailed, and spun off the highway into a field. My hands were shaking violently, but I forced myself to keep driving, flooring it the rest of the way home. The moment I got inside, I called the police and reported everything. I couldn't give precise locations, but I knew the quick check had security cameras. My car was damaged but drivable. I haven't heard anything since. I don't know why that man went after me, but I hope I never see him again.
This happened in the summer of 2022. I was 25, working an unusual logistics job hauling refurbished electronics and custom PC parts for a startup trying to compete with Amazon in rural markets. The routes were brutal, long, unpredictable, and often overnight through places most companies avoided. The pay made it worth it, and I didn't mind driving. I grew up road tripping. That night, I was finishing the final leg of a Phoenix to Lovington run around 1 a.m., winding through Route 82 near Lincoln National Forest in southern New Mexico. If you've never driven there at night, it's hard to explain how isolated it feels. Narrow roads, almost no lights, and maybe one car every half hour. There's no real alternate route. Route 82 is the only way through. I was listening to a true crime podcast when I rounded a bend and saw a red hatchback pulled onto the shoulder with hazards on. A woman stood beside it, holding her phone up like she was searching for a signal. My instinct was to keep driving, but I thought about my girlfriend, my sister, and how I'd want someone to stop for them. I also had a Glock 43 holstered under my steering column. I slowed, cracked my window, and she immediately rushed over and tried the door handle. She said she needed a ride to a gas station, her voice jittery and unfocused. Something felt off, but knowing I was armed, I unlocked the door. She climbed in, slurred a quick thank you, and avoided eye contact. Her answers didn't make sense. She just kept telling me to drive. I was leaning toward kicking her out when I glanced back at her car and saw a man step out from behind it. Another figure appeared directly in the road ahead, holding something long. That's when survival took over. I floored it. She started yelling and digging through her purse. I drew my gun, not pointing it at her, just letting her see it. She froze instantly. 30 minutes later, I dropped her at a gas station, forced her out of the truck, and left before things escalated further. At the next stop, I found a burner phone battery and zip ties wedged in my passenger seat. I never reported it. Being armed that night may have saved my life. About 3 years ago, my husband and I were driving cross-country from Utah to Georgia, passing through western Kansas along Route 400. I woke around 10 p.m. as we pulled into a tiny gas station. I went inside alone, leaving my phone and purse behind. In the restroom, I nearly collided with a woman with filthy gray hair, foam flip-flops, and a thick purple and green coat despite the summer heat. She stared at me in silence. She followed me to the sinks but didn't use them. I locked myself in a stall. After I heard the door slam, I realized she hadn't left. I could hear her breathing. She faked leaving twice, each time staying behind. When I finally exited, she was gone, until I stepped outside and saw her waiting near the entrance, holding something that looked like a knife. She turned and disappeared around the building. I ran to the car and left. I don't use roadside restrooms anymore. This happened in 2020 while I was delivering automotive parts through the Midwest. One night on I-80, exhausted and drowsy, I pulled into a deserted rest area. The only other vehicle was an old white van. When I came back out, its headlights were on, then off. Minutes later, it followed me onto the highway. The van rode my bumper, pulled beside me, and gestured for me to roll down my window, pointing at my empty truck bed. I realized then he wasn't warning me. He cut me off, stopped suddenly, then resumed following me for miles. I pulled into a truck stop and went straight into the diner. A trucker confronted the van and scared it off. 2 men were inside, silent, staring straight ahead. I stayed there an hour before leaving. I quit that job months later, because I know for a fact if I'd pulled over or rolled down that window, I wouldn't be here telling this story.